Next up is Matthew's request, and of course it's for another Swan Princess movie, this time named Royally Undercover. Seven movies up to this point, and the franchise only just ended in 2023. This one came out in 2017, only a year after Princess Tomorrow, Pirate Today. It won't be until after A Royal Wedding in 2020 that we get a pause in how often these movies come out, for obvious reasons. Either way, I guess Richard Rich really wanted to keep this series going, so let's see what's in store for us from going royally undercover. We open in some village by a reservoir where a mysterious man sends a little drilling machine into the wall and have it blow up like dynamite. By this point, I'm just willing to accept that this film series is like the Warcraft universe, where medieval technology is more advanced than normal. That said, the wall doesn't collapse right away. It's just slowly leaking water. The next morning, we see Derek and Odette go to that village to sign a trade agreement. They even came with their chef, Ferdinand, who wants the plants there for a variety of purposes. But someone else already bought them up. And that someone is Count Antonio, voiced by Kirk Thornton, who I know as Don Patch in Bobobo, Escalade in Vinland Saga, Regro Burndead in Mashal, and many more.
It's yours, I insist.
No, we couldn't.
You mustn't worry about me, Princess. Every year I manage to go home with more than my fair share.
Well, that's nice of him. By the way, has no one noticed the leak in the wall at this point? It seems like it should be noticeable by now. Anyway, Ferdinand is still mad at Antonio for buying up all the plants, even though Antonio said he was willing to share with them. We then see the king of this region, who feels indebted to Odette's father, William. Remember him? But it's time to get the plot moving by having Derek realize that the dam is breaking. He yells for everyone to evacuate.
Prince Derek! Wait! Prince Derek!
Well, I'll give them credit for actually having a dangerous moment take place. Not surprisingly, the village is destroyed. And Antonio raises the idea of having other kingdoms send aid to help rebuild the place. He seems like a decent guy, right? With that, we get the usual credits and CGI water swirl animation. We cut to Swan Lake Castle, where our heroes announce their plans to help the destroyed village. They tell their subjects to chip in, leading to our first song of the movie.
So many hearts in need, when we help each other is when we start to see.
Every journey starts with just one step.
It's okay. Shows that people can come together in a crisis. The donations start rolling in from goods to gold. And I'll assume that Odette and Derek are chipping in too, because they can't have their subjects do all the work, right? We then cut over to Lucas from the last movie, who's delivering stuff to the castle. And his parents even give him flowers to give to Elise. Elise even invites him to play with her in the castle, but he's reluctant since he's of lower birth and all that. Honestly, Lucas should know that his origins are a non-factor. Odette and Derek are the nicest royals in the entire world, and I think they would be open-minded about this sort of thing. In the following scene, Elise and Odette stop by a large portrait of King William.
He looks so nice.
He was nice. Very nice. And if he were here today, he'd be one very proud grandfather.
With how little we knew about him, I'd probably believe that at this point. Meanwhile, Roger sees some star patterns in the sky and decides to name it after Uberta. I guess they're still together at this point. But now, it's time to ease into the main theme of this movie.
Hello? Tree climber here?
It's Lucas.
It's me, Lord Rogers. How did you learn Alpernian code?
Yeah, just as the DVD cover implies, we're getting into some espionage stuff. Though at least it's a more important part of the movie plot than the pirate gimmick of the last movie. Rogers invites Lucas to come to the castle, but to no avail. Elise starts to wonder if she's really friends with the boy. not aware that he's just uneasy around royalty. Anyway, Antonio shows up for a visit and meets Uberta. Antonio is also accompanied by his chauffeur, Bruno. They're apparently well known outside their kingdom, but Jean-Bob isn't impressed.
Super nice.
Yeah, but add in those scary dogs, and he's like the uncle who shows up for Thanksgiving in a weird sweater, and he's all sweaty, and he's always got a little food on his face, and... I stopped talking.
Please do. The royal family gives Antonio a tour of the docks and how they've been sending supplies to the destroyed village. And that's a lot of gold. And that's all from other people? It's apparently enough to rebuild the village. Maybe this kingdom is a lot wealthier than is shown. It'd make more sense if half the gold came from the royal family.
Came to make a donation.
Bless your heart, Miss Margaret.
It'd make more sense if half the gold came from the royal family. Guess Odette and Derek aren't as charitable as I thought they were. Anyway, Rogers tries to convince Derek and Odette that Antonio is a literal devil, only to later admit that he's just jealous of the guy. Sadly, Odette and Derek aren't going to do much the rest of the way, because we're back to focusing on Elise and Lucas. She overhears Antonio talking to Bruno about Uberta.
She can't possibly think I would marry her. You know me, I'm a flirt.
She tells Rogers about it, and he's happy to be right about Antonio, even though being a flirt shouldn't be anything sinister. But of course that convinces Elise and Rogers to keep track of the guy.
You mean we'll be like spies?
Not like spies. Spies.
They really love the anachronisms, don't they? Lucas gets roped into this too, since he already showed some spy skills. And the animals tag along. I guess the art of Odette wearing sunglasses is a lie. But at least they have one funny slow-mo joke.
He can't even keep up in slow motion.
As I thought, Rogers is an inventor who has his own secret lab. And he was working on things that help him spy on enemies. Okay, I guess the kingdom needs this stuff to defend itself, but I just hope that he built all this after he moved to the castle. Anyway, he has gadgets, like various bow ties that do different things, like blow gusts of wind. There's also a necklace that has smokescreen gems, which also magically reappear on the necklace after use. And just for added flavor, Elise and Lucas have a brief rivalry to see who can be a better spy. The plan is for Elise to convince Bruno to let her tag along to the village and monitor a shipment of new supplies heading there, only to go to their kingdom beforehand to learn more about Antonio. Rogers will keep an eye on Antonio with the help of Jean-Bob and Speed, and Puffin will operate on his own as a flyer. Then the kids try to steer the convoy to that detour, on the grounds that they can get more toys for the children. But Bruno rejects the idea because of how too many toys could spoil the children. Sure, so Elise and Lucas sneak off on their own that night and leave a note. You'd think that Bruno would just be worried, but...
Those dumb kids.
He sounds more annoyed than concerned. Real Dad of the Year stuff right there. And yeah, I guess Rogers was right about Antonio if even Bruno is a jerk. He sends their hunting dogs after the kids, but the kids use bacon to pull them up a tree. Then we see one of those undercover vans, but it's a horse wagon, which has all this medieval tech, and Rogers is using a string phone to communicate.
The name is Bob. Jean-Bob.
I liked it better when this was Freddy the Frog. And don't worry, I'll be sure to do that one before the season ends. Uberta reveals to Antonio that she has the keys to many of the rooms in the castle, which normally the king would have, and that she's preparing a whole wedding reception to marry a certain someone. Jean-Bob distracts them before she can pop the question, but it's Bruno who calls Antonio away.
They're gone to Borromeo?
I tried to track them down, but...
Now those little brats will nose around and figure out everything.
Based on what? Seems everyone is kinda dumb in this movie. But yeah, Antonio is the bad guy, and he blew up the dam because we see the mechanical fingers from his suited form, which we never see again. So what's the plan now?
Get back to Borromeo and make sure those little pests never come back.
Even with your goal of just stealing stuff, that's just going to grab the attention of the kingdoms you're trying to steal from. Moving on, Puffin arrives in Borromeo, which looks fine, but probably would have looked even better in 2D. Going around the palace, he finds...
Number 9!
Wait, you know him? Okay, so even though the voice cast page on Wikipedia doesn't list him as being in the Christmas movie, going to the actual page for that movie and comparing it to Royally Undercover does list that number 9 is voiced by David Lodge. Based on the summary for the Christmas movie, he was an antagonist, because of course cats have to be antagonists in this franchise too. But now, he's the cat of Borromeo's king, going by the name Jasper now, but gets pushed into helping our heroes this time around. I mean, anything to avoid being put on trial, even though he's a cat and not a person. Back with Antonio, he tells Derek and Odette about falling in love with Uberta, which they seem to be cool with. Rogers can't help but complain, so now he has to find a way to stop his proposal to Uberta. The kids learn that Antonio has ships come and go from this place, but hasn't been sending them to the village. So he's definitely stealing from his kingdom, and is doing the same towards Derek and Odette. To get answers, Lucas and Elise decide to try asking the king about what's going on. Lucas has to put on a princely outfit to get an audience, and that's where we're introduced to Marquis Niccolo, also voiced by David Lodge. He isn't in the mood to let them visit his king, but Elise says,
Your Count Antonio has come to my grandmother's kingdom. We think he's up to something, and we're not leaving until we find out what it is.
How'd you know that would work?
I didn't.
So they tell King Sebastian about Antonio falling for Uberta and question his legitimacy. The king vouches for Antonio though, so the kids just have to accept that for now. But the king does make one request.
If you could find my darn cat, that would be wonderful.
I really have to know the context for this, because how the hell did he become his cat? The kids head back toward the harbor and find Jasper and Puffin. Both the animals confirm that Antonio is bad, and they show a place that is actually a cover for his operation. And oh look, one guy has 2 steel claws for a hand. Is this just part of the theme the gang have? I don't know. They're building something for their big getaway later. Then Jasper draws attention to himself by stupidly trying to get a fish, which leads to the bad guys jailing Elise and Lucas. Then Niccolo shows up to taunt them, because he's in on this as well.
Those poor children. They stuck their noses in where they should not have.
I guess his job is to keep the king in the dark while Antonio can operate without looking over his shoulder. In exchange, he'll end up getting the kingdom. What an asshole. Also, because Elise saw the sword King William had in the portrait, she somehow recognizes that it's with Niccolo. Not sure how that relates to anything, though it's just a nice nod to continuity towards William, I guess. Maybe this all happened before William was killed by Rothbart? Puffin and Jasper return to bring the kids their little gadget vests that break them out of jail. As they evade more guards with their gadgets, they kinda have a back and forth over who's the better spy, until they get surrounded. With the bad guys on their tail, Jasper offers to get them out of the city, but Elise isn't leaving without her grandfather's sword. They'll still find a way to stop Antonio, but the sword is a priority. So to get the kids to the palace, Jasper causes a distraction by knocking stuff over. Elise and Lucas reach the castle gates, and even though that one guard they know is aware of their presence, he doesn't seem to act when the kids get surrounded again. Only when Elise calls for him after getting Jasper does he say,
Ah, wonderful! Bring him over, princess!
And if you're thinking he's in on the scheme, no, he's not. They return Jasper to the king, and as Niccolo tries to get them to leave, Elise tells Sebastian about her grandfather's sword. He forces Niccolo to return it, since he actually is a good guy, meaning we only have 3 main baddies to contend with this time. Meanwhile, Antonio tries proposing to Uberta, but of course it's actually Rogers in disguise. And maybe it's a good thing this bit is in 3D, because I can't imagine this working in 2D.
Proceed.
Uberta calls Rogers out for his interference, so...
I don't believe it! You would never marry him!
This wedding is so odd.
Okay, why would you give the keys to someone you didn't marry yet? You're just asking to be robbed. That night, the kids get lost in the sewers, but they reflect moonlight with the sword and Puffin's glass to signal Rogers for help. Not going to question how far away they are to where this could even work, but they tell Rogers to check the treasury, and sure enough, it's empty. Rogers tells Derek and Odette about what's going on, and now they have to warn Uberta. Meanwhile, the kids find the baddies preparing the submarine they built, who then worry about not getting their cut of the gold, and they start collecting. The kids prepare to sneak into the sub, and I guess Lucas is finally at ease with being alongside royalty. Still, they get caught by Bruno. Seeing as how he's the least involved in this whole movie, maybe he could have his mind changed?
Then how can you do this?
Because sometimes one makes a decision that can never be changed.
You could have given us one villain who would turn, but I guess not. Niccolo sees Antonio's ship and prepares to do his part by kidnapping the king. Jasper runs into Bruno and decides to stop him by dropping a flower pot on him. Although there's a bit of miscontinuity because when he knocked it over, there was only one other flower pot up there, but here they seem to have all respawned.
Great continuity!
Derek tells Uberta what happened, and naturally she's upset. Rogers attempts to console her.
Time is the best remedy for a broken heart.
It's true. Time and revenge!
That's really good. I'll give you that one. Jasper finds the kids and attempts to free them from the net. He has to be reminded to use his claws and to imagine the rope as Niccolo for...
That rope ruined your comfy life. That rope turned you from a palace cat into an alley cat.
Was this because of the earlier scene, or was this his villain motivation that one time? Either way, they get into the submarine while Niccolo takes the king outside. The kids reach the ship and they start stealing the treasure by loading it into their sub. Of course, Jasper's fear of rats almost give them away. Thankfully, it works out when the rats escape up on deck and lure away the hunting dogs. But Elise gets part of her costume caught on the door while peeking outside, so now Antonio suspects something. Lucas has to cover for her escape, and Antonio manages to capture him. Clearly, this is the most intense scene in the movie.
Now I know how you felt when I disappeared years ago.
I'm pretty sure his thoughts were, I'm dying, more than being sad that you were kidnapped.
Are you safe? Are you there?
Is this really a good time for this song? It would have made more sense earlier instead of being used for the climax. Antonio starts firing on the submarine with his cannons, even though it has the treasure he's stealing. But then Derek and Uberta show up to kick his ass. Uberta does have her moments in using a glove to slap Antonio and isn't all that scared when he draws a sword on her. But Derek carries this fight because he can actually use a sword.
Are you near? Are you far?
Oh, and this is the extent of Odette's role in this movie. You know, in a series that's supposed to be about her. Derek defeats Antonio, but before the big bad is thrown overboard, Uberta wants to hear his proposal.
Will you marry me?
Not in a million years. You weasel!
Damn, you showed him! Antonio tries to get Derek one last time, but Elise kicks him over to force him into fleeing via rowboat. Lucas is rescued, and Elise admits that he's the better spy than she is. Niccolo tries to figure out where the sub went, and is soon surrounded by the king's men. Sebastian knew that Niccolo was up to no good all along, but...
If even I couldn't believe that the great Count Antonio and Marquis Niccolo would betray their king, neither would my people. Men as popular as yourself need to be caught red-handed.
Fair enough. Rogers and Uberta make up. Sorta. And then we see Rogers react to Lucas chatting with Elise over blinking light signals. Uberta doesn't realize this and she ends up making the proposal. And...
I'd love to. Oh, yes, yes!
Well, it was bound to happen at some point. But yeah, Lucas accepts the offer to visit Elise in the castle this time, and everyone is very welcoming towards him. As for Antonio...
Meat.
Couldn't help yourself with that, huh? Anyway, this is a little better than the last movie, but still highly unnecessary. Again, this should have just been part of a TV series and not a series of movies, especially if they're going to bear the name of the Swan Princess despite not being about the Swan Princess. Odette had more screen time at least, but her biggest contributions were 2 songs. Derek at least got to save a child and fight the final boss. Most of the time, we were just following the kids doing things. Hell, even Rogers and Uberta were more relevant to the story compared to Odette and Derek. While the villain plot is more stock, at least he seemed like a threat in how he took advantage of people in need. I also wished that the story did more with some of the gadgets. I mean, why only use Antonio's cool spy suit once and never again? It's just too safe all around, though I do appreciate them redeeming the former cat villain at least. Everything else, from music to animation, is about the same at this point. It's nothing offensive, just a studio trying to make bank off of something that should be dead by now. And with how many there are left to watch, I might have to take time outside of requests to do them before the show ends. In the meantime, next time, we'll be taking the path to power. I'll see you then.
Living